Hello everyone. Today we are going to be discussing pronouns. Now, the general function of a pronoun is to replace nouns. Therefore, they make languages shorter and they help us to avoid repetition. But one important thing when it comes to pronouns is that they will always be accompanied by an antecedent. An antecedent will refer to that person or thing that's being spoken about. And your pronouns must agree with the antecedent in terms of gender and number, right? So you can't be talking about John, and then when you make reference to John, using a pronoun, you use she, for example. No, because she would be for a female. Okay, so they have to agree in terms of gender and number. And they also must be mentioned. Because you can't just say, even if you're having a conversation with someone, you can't just say, well, he did this. Who is he? So we will still need to know who we are talking about. So that is what we call the antecedent. That person or thing that's being referred to. And the pronoun would just help us to avoid having to constantly mention the antecedent. But the pronoun must agree with the antecedent in terms of gender and number. So the first type of pronoun that we will look at today is called a subject pronoun. So a subject pronoun replaces the person or thing that performs an action. In other words, it replaces the noun as the subject, right? Subject pronouns can be singular, plural, masculine, feminine, or gender neutral. So this is why I talked about the antecedent the pronoun having to agree with the antecedent because of these characteristics right here. They can be singular, plural, masculine, feminine, or gender neutral. All right? So let's look at the different subject pronouns. We'll start with the singular. I, first person singular, of course, I am here. Right? So if you were referring to if you're referring to yourself, right? You can say I am here. Instead of saying, okay, my name is Christopher. Christopher is here. And I'm referring to myself, I would say I am here. You play football, that's the second person singular. You could be referring to somebody that you know or what have you. You play football. Yes. That would be, you would be second person singular. He cooks food. He could be a male that is one male because this is this third person singular. And masculine pronoun, of course. So like I said, John, I could say John cooks food. And to replace John, we could say he cooks food, right? She believes in God, same thing. She could have replaced any female, right? Susan, for example. Susan believes in God. If you want to replace Susan with a pronoun, appropriate pronoun, we would say she believes in God. It is eaten. It usually would refer to animals, right? So it is eaten, or it could also refer to things, right? The it. But obviously this is talking about action, and a thing cannot perform an action. So in this case, we are talking about animals, really, right? So it could have replaced the dog, the cat, the rabbit, what have you, right? So let's go over to the plural. We understand it. So the we would be the first person plural. That could have replaced my family and I, for example. They fixed the car. They would refer to the third person plural. That could have replaced Mark and John. And you, which would be the second person plural, saw the bear. So this would refer to more than one person with whom you are familiar, right? You saw the bear. So you would see that subject pronouns would go into the same position that the subject would go. That's why they are called subject pronouns. So you identify the subject, okay, and then you replace it with the appropriate subject pronoun based on the gender and the number of the subject. Okay? So this would be the first type of pronoun. Now we are going to proceed to object pronouns. So we move on to object pronouns. And of course these will be the opposite of subject pronouns, right? So object pronouns can be classified as either being direct or indirect, okay? So direct object pronouns replace direct objects in a sentence. And if you do not know what a direct object is, it refers to the person or thing that receives the action of the verb. In other words, it answers the question of who or what receives the action, okay? So the direct object pronoun will simply replace the direct object in a sentence. Conversely, indirect object pronouns will replace indirect objects, and an indirect object refers to the person or thing that receives the direct object. In other words, it answers the question of to whom or what, or for whom or what an action is done. So if you have a sentence that has an indirect object, then it must have a direct object. And both of these can be replaced, okay? But let's start with the direct. And also, before we get there, the pronouns are going to be the same. It's just that they will have different functions, right? So let's start with the direct. The singular, the plural, and then we will go over to the indirect. So the singular direct object pronouns will be me, you, him, her, it. So for me, he listened to me. So obviously that answers the question of who did he listen to? Me. So me would be the direct object. And that, right. I understand you. Who did you understand? You. Who did I understand? You, right. The teacher forgives him. Who did the teacher forgive? Him. The school suspended her. Who did the teacher suspend? Her. And she fed it. What did she feed? It. So the same rules will apply. The object pronouns have to agree with their antecedent, right? So you can't have you can't be using you can't be having an antecedent that does not agree with the object pronoun, right? So whoever is receiving the action, or who or whatever is receiving the action must agree with the antecedent, right? And in plural, we have us, them, and you. They do not know us. Susan missed them, and we need you. So, okay, us could have replaced my family, for example. Them could have replaced Jill and George. Instead of saying Susan missed Jill and George, we could say Susan missed them. And yes, and you would be obviously plural for you all, right? All right, so let's move over to indirect object pronouns. He gave it to me. So me, well, to me would be the indirect object pronoun, even though it includes the preposition. And that answers the question of for whom, or rather to whom the action is done. So it was done to me. I received the it, whatever it is, and it in this case would be the direct object pronoun, right? So this is an example of both object pronouns being used. So this is an example of objects being replaced by object pronouns. So we have the it being the direct object pronoun and the to me being the indirect object pronoun. We sent you a letter. You, because I am the one receiving the direct object, which in this case would be the letter. I lent him my car. Him would obviously be the indirect object. My car would be the direct object. Mark gave her a kiss. Her would be indirect object pronoun. My mother adds sugar to it. It to it would be the indirect object pronoun, right? And this is the plural. Send us the picture. Us would be the us because we would be the recipients of the picture, which is excuse me, which is the direct object. And tell them the truth. The truth would be the direct object. Them would be the indirect object. We will give you a notice. You, indirect object, a notice, direct object. But that isn't, obviously that is not, we didn't use the direct object pronoun. So in some of these sentences, we just mentioned the direct object, but we didn't replace them with the corresponding direct object pronouns because the main focus is the indirect object pronouns. Alright? So as you will see, they're pretty much the same. It's just that they have different functions. Okay? So these are object pronouns. And now we are going to proceed to relative pronouns. So we move on to relative pronouns. And these are a bit different. These function a bit differently, right? So relative pronouns are used to refer to nouns mentioned previously, whether they are people, places, things, animals, or ideas. So what relative pronouns do is that they provide more information about a noun that was previously mentioned. They are also used to join two sentences, right? And they're generally four relative pronouns. We have who, whom, which, and that. And these will have different functions as you will see shortly, right? So who, and of course we're not using who to ask a question. That's another type of pronoun that we'll get to. But who provides more information about a person, right? So this refers to people and is used as a subject. So for example, let's go on this side here. I know people who believe it, right? The who is referring to the people, right? So it's adding additional information about people. I know people who believe it. Yeah? Right. Whom. Whom does the same thing as who, but the only difference is that whom is going to be used as an object. Therefore, Albert was the one whom Anna gave the keys to, right? So Albert, whom is talking about Albert, right? So we use the object here because he is the one who received the keys. So we use whom, right? Even though in spoken English we would say who, right? But in formal English, whom would actually be correct because it's being used as an object, all right? And you would realize that a lot of these pronouns that we do today can have different functions, meaning that they can belong to other categories of pronouns, right? It just depends on how they're being used in the given context. So whom. Which. This introduces further information, right? And this usually can be, this is usually used to refer to things, right? Yeah, usually things, yeah. So, example, Chelsea, which is my favorite team, won the Champions League. So Chelsea, which is obviously referring to Chelsea, right? Which is a team, which could be classified as a thing, right? So which adds additional information about Chelsea. And we go to that. that is going to introduce further information, just like which, and that could be used to refer to both persons and people, right? Yeah, that could be used for both persons and things, rather. So persons and things, that can be used to add further information. So the car that broke down was mine. The that is obviously referring to the car, right? But like I said, that can also be used to refer to persons, right? So for example, the man that won the prize was my father. So the that is referring to the man. Okay? So that can be used with to refer to people or things. So basically, relative pronouns are going to add additional information about a noun that was previously mentioned. Okay? So these would be the relative pronouns that you have in English. And now we are going to proceed to demonstrative pronouns. So we move on to demonstrative pronouns. So these are used to highlight or point out things, right? So demonstrative pronouns express the position of nouns as near or distant, and it could also include time, right? So this is the distance from the speaker, right? So if the object is close to the speaker, then we are going to use this, right? If it's farther away, we will use that. And these would just be the plural of this, and those will be the plural of that. Simple. So demonstrative pronouns point out the distance that an object is from the speaker, right? So if it is near, it will be this. If it is farther away, it will be that, and referring to one, of course, because this is singular. And then these will be the plural of this, and those will be the plural of that. So let's look at some examples. This is tedious. Okay, so whatever the item or thing that you're talking about, you're saying this is tedious. So that implies that it is close to the speaker, right? Eat these today, and of course these would just be the plural of this. So this would show that the objects are close to the speaker. All right. Now let's look over here. This is the question, of course. Is that yours? So that means that it is farther away from the speaker, right? And throw those away, well, that would just be the plural form of that, right? So refer to more than one thing that is farther away from the speaker. All right. Now, I have to make an important distinction. These words can also function as demonstrative adjectives, but here they will be pronouns. If we want to make these demonstrative adjectives, then it would have to go before nouns, right? So if I wanted to mention the noun, then it will become a demonstrative adjective, okay? So this car, this and that. So if I say this car, this car is red, for example. This in this case is functioning as an adjective because it's describing the car, okay? But for it to be a demonstrative pronoun, it has to pretty much be on its own. It cannot go before a noun. So that's the distinction between a demonstrative pronoun and demonstrative adjective, right? So for it to be a demonstrative adjective, it must go before the noun, okay? So that's just an important distinction. Okay, so these are demonstrative pronouns. Now we're going to proceed to possessives. So we move to possessive pronouns. So possessive pronouns replace nouns that indicate possession. They tell us who something belongs to. So very simple. So we have singular and plural possessive pronouns. So we have mine, that car is mine. And that would relate to the subject pronoun I, right? So it's like saying that car belongs to me, right? Mine, that car is mine, right? Yours, that will relate to the second person singular you. These are yours, meaning that they belong to you. His, that relates to he. The phone is his, right? That's like saying the phone belongs to him, right? Her will be she. These apples are hers. Plural, we have ours, which would relate to we. This must be ours. That's like saying this must this must belong. Well, it will be this must belong to us because it will be an object, right? But yes, ours would be the possessive pronoun. Yours would be the second person plural. The chair is yours, and the third person. This third person plural, theirs, would relate to them, or I mean they, right? So the gift is theirs. So as you see, these possessive pronouns can stay on their own. So they're going to replace nouns that indicate possession. So in a case like, okay, let's use his for example. The phone is Susan's with the apostrophe S. So that's indicating possession. The apostrophe S indicates possession. So we could replace that. Well, I said Susan, so that's a girl. Right. So we could replace Susan's with hers. The phone is hers. Right? Instead of saying the phone is Susan's. Alright? So that would be those would be nouns that would be replaced by the possessive pronouns. Now, a key point to note is that the difference between possessive pronouns and possessive adjectives would be that possessive adjectives require a noun to follow them. The only pronoun here that could function as a possessive adjective would be his, because you could say his phone, right? So if you say his phone, the his is actually a possessive adjective because it is modifying the noun phone. But all the others would not function as possessive adjectives because, as you see, they have S on them, like yours, hers, ours, etc. Right? But his can actually function as a possessive adjective if it is used before a noun. All right? But in this case, it will be a pronoun because it is used by itself, right? And it replaces a noun indicating possession. Like, for example, Susan's apostrophe S, right? So these are possessive pronouns. Now we are going to proceed to indefinite pronouns. Now, we move to indefinite pronouns. So indefinite pronouns are used to refer to people, things, or amounts without saying exactly who or what they are. Right, hence the name indefinite. It is not specific or precise, okay? So indefinite pronouns can be singular and or plural. Right. So here are some examples of indefinite pronouns, right? So singular, another, anybody, everybody, nothing, nobody, something, etc. So you will see that in all of these, nothing or no one in particular is being mentioned. It is general. Anybody. It could be anybody. Everybody. It is not pointing out someone specific or something specific. So examples of plural indefinite pronouns would be both, few, many, several. Again, they give you a hint at the amount, right? But they're not being specific, right? They're not being specific. And there's some that can be singular and plural depending on the context. So all or most. So let me give you an example. So let's use most. If it is plural, we would say most people believe in God, right? No, actually, no, sorry. No, let me not say that, because that would be incorrect. No, scrap that. Most of the town, no, let's start with singular. Most of the town is red. So it's referring to the color of the town. In that case, it will be singular. But if we want to make it plural, then we would say most of them believe in God, right? Or most believe in God. We actually don't have to say most of all. We don't have to use that prepositional phrase. We could just say most believe in God. Just most believe in God. So again, most refers to the majority, but we're not being specific. So in that case, it would be plural. Most believe in God, and the singular counterpart would be most of the town is red. Right? Alright, so these are examples of indefinite pronouns, and now we're going to proceed to reflexive pronouns. We move on to reflexive pronouns. And you will see that I have intensive in brackets because these can also be intensive pronouns. But we'll get to that. So what are reflexive pronouns? So reflexive pronouns are pronouns that are used in the object position when the subject and object of the sentence are the same. In essence, to show persons acting on themselves. Now, usually the subject and the object in a sentence are different, right? The person who's performing the action is going to be different from the person who is receiving the action, right? But with reflexive pronouns, now, you have the subject and the object being the same. Therefore, this is very important. It's very important that the subject and object agree, right? So in this case, the antecedent would be the subject pronoun, right? Or yes, it would be the subject, not necessarily subject pronoun, but the subject, right? And the reflexive pronoun must agree with that, right? So let's see. So reflexive pronouns end in self. Given that the subject and the object will be the same, yes. And cells would be the plural, and of course these would depend on number. So let's look at the singular reflexive pronouns. I am teaching myself to dance. So you see, myself would be the reflexive pronoun, and the antecedent would be I. So that would be the reflexive pronoun that would correspond to I, right? So I am teaching myself to dance. You must tell yourself. You must tell yourself. Right. But I should also add on, let me just add on a little thing. Instead of saying tell yourself, you should tell yourself positive things, right? Because tell is one of those verbs that require a direct and an indirect object. So you must tell yourself positive things. Right? So you see that the reflexive pronoun will follow the verb, right? Because that's objects follow the verb, right? He talks to himself. She talks to herself, right? A tyranny usually implodes on itself. So in this case, now itself would correspond to a tyranny, which could be replaced by the subject pronoun it. Okay? Now, it is always important to believe in oneself. So oneself would be impersonal because it's not referring to a specific subject. The subject is not specified, right? So this would be impersonal. Given that the subject was not specified, this would be the impersonal reflexive pronoun, right? So let's go over to the plurals. We can entertain ourselves. You see, ourselves corresponds to we. Surround yourselves with positive people. So it will be implied by context that we're referring to a group of people that we know. Hence, we're using you. So this is just, so if you want to make the context a little clearer, we could say you must surround yourselves with positive people. But if it's already understood by context that we're talking to a group of people we already know, then this is fine, right? But if we don't know that, we would say you must surround yourselves with positive people. Mm-hmm. They blame themselves for what happened. Mm-hmm. Themselves and will correspond to they, right? So, as you see, when it comes to reflexive pronouns, the reflexive pronoun has to agree with the antecedent in terms of gender and number, like himself, herself, or themselves. Okay? Now let's look at intensive. Now, while the reflexive pronouns are used to refer back to the subject, intensive pronouns are used to place emphasis, right? So to place emphasis on the sentence, right? And they're going to be the same pronouns, right? But their purpose is for emphasis. So let me give you an example. Let's use myself. I myself knew that. Now you see that in this case, the pronoun comes directly after the subject, which would be the antecedent, right? But I could also say, I knew that myself. You see? So if we remove the intensive pronoun, the sentence would still be, yeah, it would be grammatical, but it would lack emphasis. The myself in that case is just adding emphasis, right? You don't really need to use it. It's just for emphasis. So you could say, I myself knew that, or you could say, I knew that myself. So the myself can come directly after the antecedent, or it can go at the end of the sentence, right? So that's the difference between reflexive and intensive pronouns. They're all the same, but they have different functions within a sentence, okay? So these are reflexive pronouns and, yeah, and intensive. So now we're going to proceed to interrogative. So we have interrogative pronouns, and as the name suggests, these refer to pronouns that are used to ask questions. There are 5 of them: what, which, who, whom, and whose. Alright? As you see, these can stand on their own and they're used to ask questions. Okay? So, what do you want for lunch? Which is yours? Who believes in mermaids? To whom is this letter addressed and whose is it? So these are question words, basically, and they're pronouns. Now, these can also be interrogative adjectives depending on how they're used. For example, whose. Now, if I say whose car is it, then whose becomes an interrogative adjective because it's used before a noun, right? So that will be the difference between an interrogative pronoun and an interrogative adjective. An interrogative adjective requires a noun to be placed after it, whereas an interrogative pronoun stands on its own, right? So Whose is it? Whose car is it? Right? So that's the difference. Right? So interrogative pronouns are pronouns that are simply used to ask questions. Okay? Alright, so this would be interrogative pronouns. And we're going to go on to the final type of pronoun that we'll look at today, which is called a reciprocal pronoun. So we've reached the end of the pronouns lesson. And the final pronoun that we are going to look at is called a reciprocal pronoun. And as it suggests, reciprocal pronoun, as the name suggests, reciprocal pronouns are used to express a mutual relationship. In other words, when someone or something performs an action on others and receives the same action in return. Yes. Right? So you perform an action on someone and you receive the same action. Right? So that's why it's called a reciprocal pronoun. And thankfully there are only two. Each other and one another. So Romeo and Juliet love each other. Each other means that Romeo loves Juliet and vice versa. Simple. Right? So the person performing the action will also receive that action. Right? The dogs still close together in order to protect one another. Same thing, one another means that the dogs looked out for each other. See, and then we have to use back another reciprocal pronoun, right? So all this means is that all the dogs performed the action and received it as well, right? So these are reciprocal pronouns, and there are only two of them, each other and one another, and it indicates a mutual relationship or exchange. Well, exchange, yeah, and relationship. All right. Yeah. So this brings us to the end of the pronouns lesson. I hope you were able to comprehend everything, and I hope you survived, of course. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.